Hola amigos, bien o no, saludos otra vez desde Medellín. Hoy quiero hablar solo con dos palabras que yo escucho que ustedes confunden mucho. Was and were. Was and were. This is our theme for today. So, was and were. We're familiar with this when we talk about the past of the verb to be. So, I was late. I was late, or I am late, if we're in the present moment. I was late, talking about the recent past. Why were you late? It's a question to me. Why were you late? Because it's just happened. Why were you late? Or why are you late? Because, like, in this moment. Why were you late yesterday? Why are you late now? That's much easier because we're just talking about the verb to be and it's who it's relating to you or to me. But there's another way we use was and were, and this is where we're reporting in the past about a singular or a multiple thing. And this is where we get confused. Let's give some examples. There were many people in town. Mucha gente. There were many people in town. There was a crowd in town. So if I use were because there were many people or a lot of people, why don't I use were when I'm talking about a crowd? Why don't I say there were a crowd in town? Why not? This is to do with whether it's a countable thing or not. So people are countable. You can look at them and all look, there they are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 200, 500, 32. Yeah. You can count them. A crowd is a particular noun we use to describe a group of people. And it's not countable in the same way, in the sense that you would have to say there are two crowds. You'd have to be able to see the edge of one and the edge of another. So you'd have to have two groups that you could see, like from a helicopter, and see clearly, look, there's one group and there's another group. Then you can count them because you can see the edge. But if you're just looking into the street and you see a large group of people, you can't tell whether that's really two crowds mixed together to make one big one, or whether it's just one big crowd. So we count it as a crowd until we know better. So there was a crowd, because by saying that, it's a singular thing, a crowd. Notice it's a crowd, one thing. Let's give another example. There was a lot of water. A lot of water. Or there were 50 bottles of water. So how comes that's changed? Well, water you can't count. Water is water. It's a thing you can't count unless you give it a unit. Unless you say it's a litre or 1,000 litres or a gallon or a bottle of water or a cup of water. Then you can count the cup, the litres, the gallons. But water itself you can't count, like air. You can't count that either. So in that sense it has to be there was a lot. And notice again it's a. So technically it's singular, a lot, like an amount of water. And we use a lot to imply a large amount. So there was a lot of water. But here we've been specific. There were 50 bottles of water. So 50, it's more than one. So it's a multiple. We can count it because it's bottles. We can count bottles. And then we got a number. There were 50 bottles of water. So now we can count it. So now we have to use were because we know it's a multiple that we can count. Let's give you another one. There was a box of apples on the table. There was a box of apples on the table. Now, I know what you're saying, but Graham, it's apples. You can count apples. This is true. Individually, you can count them. But at this moment, they are in a box, as in one box. So now it's singular because the object is a box. What's in it is countable, but the box is just one thing, so therefore it is singular, therefore it was a box. But there were a lot of apples in the box. Now notice here, apples is countable. I can count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I have to use were because the apples is the countable multiple object. I'm using a lot because I haven't counted them yet, and a lot, rather like I used for water, is to indicate a large amount. Yeah? But because I can count apples generally, we have to use were because it's a countable thing. Yeah? I could have said there were 123 apples in the box when I've counted them, but for now, it's just a lot. Yeah? So thing to remember, lots of foodstuffs particularly are things that you cannot count unless you give them a unit, like a kilo, an ounce, so many grams. Yeah. Cheese, can't count it, kilos of. Milk, same again, litres of. Yeah. Sugar, no, kilos of. Bread, okay, you can count it in loaves of bread, or again by weight. Usually we count it as loaves, that's a unit. Meat, no, that's kilos. Tea, again, kilos of. So the key thing to think about with this, if you're trying to decide whether you should use where or were or was, we're talking about were, it has to be a multiple thing. There's a multiple of them, a large amount, or hopefully something you can count. If you can't count it and it's a singular unit, even though it might be a large unit like a crowd, it's still singular, so we have to use was. So your first decision is it a singular thing or is it countable? Because if you can count it, there are units, then it's a multiple, then we can use were. There we go. I hope that's clear. So from Medellin, I bid you a feliz noche and cheerio for now.